Chapter number 15, Biodiversity and Conservation. If an alien from a distant galaxy were to visit our planet Earth, the first thing that would amaze and baffle him would most probably be the enormous diversity of life that he would encounter. Even for humans, the rich variety of living organisms with which they share this planet never ceases to astonish and fascinate us. The common man would find it hard to believe that there are more than 20,000 species of ants, 3 lakh species of beetles, 28,000 species of fishes, and nearly 20,000 species of orchids. Ecologists and evolutionary biologists have been trying to understand the significance of such diversity by asking important questions. Why are there so many species? Did such great diversity exist throughout Earth history? How did this diversification come about? How and why is this diversity important to the biosphere? Would it function any differently if the diversity was much less? How do humans benefit from the diversity of life? Biodiversity. In our biosphere, immense diversity or heterogeneity exists, not only at species level but at all levels of biological organization, ranging from the macromolecules within cells to biome. Biodiversity is the term popularized by the sociobiologist Edwin Wilson to describe the combined diversity at all levels of biological organization. The most important of them are: first, genetic diversity. A single species might show high diversity at the genetic level over its distributional range. The genetic variation shown by the medicinal plant Rauwolfia vomitoria growing in different Himalayan regions might be in terms of the potency and the concentration of the active chemical reserpine that the plant produces. India has more than 50,000 genetically different strains of rice and 1,000 varieties of mango. Species diversity. The diversity at the species level. For example, the Western Ghats have a greater amphibian species diversity than the Eastern Ghats. Ecological diversity. At the ecosystem level, India, for instance, with its desert, rainforest, mangroves, coral reefs, wetland, estuaries, and alpine meadows, has a greater ecosystem diversity than a Scandinavian country like Norway. It has taken millions of years of evolution to accumulate this rich diversity in nature, but we could lose all the wealth in less than 2 centuries if the present rate of the species loss continue. Biodiversity and its conservation are now vital environmental issues of international concern as more and more people around the world begin to realize the critical importance of the biodiversity for our survival and well-being on the planet. How many species are there on Earth and how many in India? Since there are published records of all the species discovered and named, we know how many species in all have been recorded so far, but it is not easy to answer the question of how many species are there on Earth. According to Iucn 2004, the total number of plant and animal species described so far is slightly more than 1.5 million. But we have no clear idea of how many species are yet to be discovered and described. Estimates vary widely and many of them are only educated guesses. For many taxonomic groups, species inventories are more complete in temperate and in the tropical countries, considering that an overwhelming large proportion of the species waiting to be discovered are in the tropics. Biologists make a statistical comparison of the temperate tropical species richness of an exhaustively studied group of insects and extrapolate this ratio to other groups of animals and plants to come up with a gross estimate of the total number of species on Earth. Some extreme estimates range from 20 to 50 million, but a more conservative and scientifically sound estimate made by Robert May places the global species diversity at about 7 million. Let us look at some interesting aspects about Earth's biodiversity based on currently available species inventories. More than 70% of all the species recorded are animals, while plants including algae, fungi, bryophytes, gymnosperms and angiosperms comprise no more than 22% of the total. Among animals, insects are the most species-rich taxonomic group, making up more than 70% of the total. That means out of every 10 animals on this planet, 7 are insects. Again, how do we explain this enormous diversification of insects? The number of fungi species in the world is more than the combined total of the species of fishes, amphibians, reptiles and mammals. In figure 15.1, biodiversity is depicted showing species number of major taxa. It should be noted that these estimates do not give any figure for prokaryotes. Biologists are not sure about how many prokaryotic species there might be. The problem is that the conventional taxonomic methods are not suitable for identifying microbial species and many species are simply not culturable under laboratory conditions. If we accept biochemical or molecular criteria for delineating species for this group, then their diversity alone might run into millions. Although India has only 2.4% of the world's land area, its shares of the global Species diversity is an impressive 8.1%. That is what makes our country one of the 12 mega diversity countries of the world. Nearly 45,000 species of plants and twice as many of animals have been recorded from India. How many living species are actually there waiting to be discovered and named? If we accept May's global estimate, only 22% of the total species have been recorded so far. Applying this proportion to the India's diversity figures, we estimate that there are probably more than 1 lakh plant species and more than 3 lakh animal species yet to be discovered and described. Would we ever be able to complete the inventory of the biological wealth of our country? Consider the immense strain, manpower, taxonomists, and the time required to complete the job. The situation appears more hopeless when we realize that a large fraction of this species faces the threat of becoming extinct even before we discover them. Nature's biological library is burning even before we catalogue the titles of all books stocked there. Patterns of biodiversity. First, latitudinal gradients. The diversity of plants and animals is not uniform throughout the world but shows a rather uneven distribution. For many groups of animals or plants, there are interesting patterns in diversity, the most well-known being the latitudinal gradient in diversity. In general, species diversity decreases as we move away from the equator towards the pole, with very few exceptions. Tropics, latitudinal range of 23.5 north to 23.5 degrees south harbor more species than temperate or polar regions. Colombia, located near the equator, has nearly 1,400 species of birds, while New York at 41 degrees north has 105 species, and Greenland at 71 degrees north has only about 56 species. India, with much of its land area in the tropical latitudes, had more than 1,200 species of birds. A forest in the tropical region like Ecuador has up to 10 times as many species of vascular plants as a forest of equal area in the temperate region like the Midwest of USA. The largely tropical Amazonian rainforest in South America has the greatest biodiversity on earth. It is home to more than 40,000 species of plants, 33,000 species of fishes, 1,300 of birds, 427 of mammals, 427 of amphibians, 378 of reptiles, and of more than 1,25,000 invertebrates. Scientists estimate that in this rainforest there might be at least 2 million insect species waiting to be discovered and named. What is so special about tropics that might account for their greater biological diversity? Ecologists and evolutionary biologists have proposed various hypotheses. Some important ones are: first, speciation is generally a function of time. Unlike temperate regions subjected to frequent glaciations, in the past tropical latitudes have remained relatively undisturbed for millions of years and thus had a long evolutionary time for species diversification. Tropical environments, unlike temperate ones, are less seasonal, relatively more constant and predictable. Such constant environments promote niche specialization and lead to greater species diversity. And third, there is more solar energy available in the tropics, which contributes to higher productivity. This in turn might contribute indirectly to greater diversity. Second, species area relationships. During his pioneering and extensive exploration in the wilderness of South American jungles, the great German naturalist and geographer Alexander von Humboldt observed that within a region, species richness increased with increasing explored area, but only up to a limit. In fact, the relation between species richness and area of wide variety of taxa, angiosperm plants, birds, bats, freshwater fishes turns out to be a rectangular hyperbola. Figure 15.2. On a logarithmic scale, the relationship is a straight line described by the equation log s is equal to log c plus z log a, where s is equal to species richness, a is equal to area, z is equal to slope of the line regression coefficient, c is equal to y-intercept. Ecologists have discovered that the value of z lies in the range of 0.1 to 0.2 regardless of the taxonomic group or the region. Whether it is the plants in Britain, birds in California, or mollusks in New York State, the slope of the regression line are amazingly similar. But if you analyze the species area relationships among very large areas like the entire continents, you will find that the slope of the line to be much steeper. Z values in the range of 0.6 to 1.2. Example, for frugivorous fruit-eating birds and mammals in the tropical forest of different continents, the slope is found to be 1.15. What do steeper slopes mean in this context? The importance of species diversity to the ecosystem. Does the number of species in a community really matter to the functioning of the ecosystem? This is a question for which ecologists have not been able to give a definitive answer. For many decades, ecologists believe that communities with more species generally tend to be more stable than those with less species. What exactly is stability for biological community? A stable community should not show too much variation in productivity from year to year. It must be either resistant or resilient to occasional disturbances, natural or man-made. And it must also be resistant to inventions by alien species. We don't know how these attributes are linked to species richness in a community. But David Tillman's long-term ecosystem experiment using outdoor plots provides some tentative answers. Tillman found that plots with more species showed less year-to-year variation in total biomass. He also showed that in his experiment, increased diversity contributed to higher productivity. Although we may not understand completely how species richness contributes to the well-being of an ecosystem, we know enough to realize that rich biodiversity is not only essential for ecosystem health but imperative for the very survival of human race on this planet. At a time when we are losing species at an alarming pace, one might ask, does it really matters to us if a few species become extinct? Would Western Ghats ecosystem be less functional if one of its tree frog species is lost forever? How is our quality of life affected if, say, instead of 20,000, we have only 15,000 species of ants on Earth? There are no direct answers to such naive questions, but we can develop a proper perspective through an analogy. The Rivet popper hypothesis used by Stanford ecologist Paul Ehrlich. In an aeroplane ecosystem, all parts are joined together using thousands of rivets species. If every passenger traveling in it starts popping a rivet to take home, causing a species to become extinct, it may not affect flight safety, proper functioning of the ecosystem initially, but as more and more rivets are removed, the plane becomes dangerously weak over a period of time. Furthermore, which rivet is removed may also be critical. Loss of rivets on the wings, key species that drive major ecosystem function, is obviously a more serious threat to flight safety than loss of a few rivets on the seats or windows inside the plane. Loss of biodiversity. While it is doubtful if any new species are being added through speciation into the Earth's treasury of species, there is no doubt about their continuing losses. The biological wealth of our planet has been declining rapidly, and the accusing finger is clearly pointing to human activities. The colonization of tropical Pacific islands by humans is said to have led to the extinction of more than 2,000 species of native birds. The Iucn Red List 2004 documents the extinction of 789 species, including 333 vertebrates, 359 invertebrates, and 87 plants in the last 500 years. Some examples of recent extinction include the dodo, Mauritius, quagga, Africa, thylacine, Australia, Stelis sea cow, Russia, and 3 subspecies Bali, Javan, Caspian of tiger. The last 20 years alone have witnessed the disappearance of 27 species. Careful analysis of records shows that extinction across taxa are not random. Some groups, like amphibians, appear to be more vulnerable to extinction. Adding to the grim scenario of extinction is the fact that more than 15,500 species worldwide are facing the threat of extinction. Presently, 12% of all bird species, 23% of all mammal species, 32% of all amphibian species, and 31% of all gymnosperms species in the world face the threat of extinction. From a study of the history of life on Earth through fossil records, we learn the large-scale loss of species like the one we are currently witnessing have also happened earlier, even before humans appeared on the scene. During the long period, 3 billion years since the origin and diversification of life on Earth, there were 5 episodes of mass extinction of species. How is this Sixth, extinction, presently in progress, different from the previous episodes. The difference is in the rates. The current species extinction rates are estimated to be 100 to 1000 times faster than in the pre-human times, and our activities are responsible for the faster rates. Ecologists warn that if the present trends continue, nearly half of all the species on Earth might be wiped out within the next 100 years. In general, loss of biodiversity in a region may lead to first, decline in the plant production, b. lowered resistance to environmental perturbations such as drought, and c. increased variability in certain ecosystem processes such as plant productivity, water use, and pest and disease cycles. Causes of biodiversity losses. The accelerated rates of species extinction that the world is facing now are largely due to human activities. There are four major causes. First, habitat loss and fragmentation. This is the most important cause driving animals and plants to extinction. The most dramatic examples of habitat loss come from tropical rainforest. Once covering more than 14% of the Earth's land surface, this rainforest now covers no more than 6%. They are being destroyed fast. By the time you finish reading this chapter, 1,000 more hectares of rainforest would have been lost. The Amazon rainforest is so huge that it is called the lungs of the planet. Harboring probably millions of species is being cut and cleared for cultivating soya beans or for conversion of grasslands for raising beef cattle. Besides total loss, the degradation of many habitats by pollution also threatens the survival of many species. When large habitats are broken up into small fragments due to various human activities, mammals and birds requiring large territories and certain animals with migratory habits are badly affected, leading to population decline. Overexploitation. Humans have always depended on nature for food and shelter, but when need turns into greed, it leads to overexploitation of the natural resources. Many species extinction in the last 500 years, Steelers, sea cow, passenger pigeon, were due to overexploitation by humans. Presently, many marine fish population around the world are over-harvested and endangering the continued existence of some commercially important species. Alien species inventions. When alien species are introduced unintentionally or deliberately for whatever purposes, some of them turn invasive and cause decline or extinction of indigenous species. The Nile perch introduced into Lake Victoria in East Africa led to eventually to the extinction of an ecologically unique assemblage of more than 200 species of cichlid fish in the lake. You must be familiar with the environmental damage caused and threat posed to our native species by invasive weed species like carrot grass, Parthenium, Lantana, and water hyacinth Iconia. The recent illegal introduction of the African catfish Clarius grapinus for aquaculture purposes is posing a threat to the indigenous catfishes in our rivers. Co-extinctions. When a species becomes extinct, the plant and the animal species associated with it in an obligatory way also become extinct. When a host fish species become extinct, its unique assemblage of parasites also meets the same fate. Another example is the case of co-evolved plant pollinator mutualism, where extinction of one invariably leads to the extinction of the other. Biodiversity conservation. Why should we conserve biodiversity? There are many reasons, some obvious and others are not so obvious, but all equally important. They can be grouped into three categories: narrowly utilitarian, broadly utilitarian, and ethical. The narrowly utilitarian arguments for conserving biodiversity are obvious. Humans derive countless direct economic benefits from nature: food, cereals, pulses, fruits, firewood, fiber, construction material, industrial products, tannins, lubricants, dyes, resins, perfumes, and products of medicinal importance. More than 25% of the drugs currently sold in the market worldwide are derived from plants, and 25,000 species of plants contribute to the traditional medicines used by native peoples around the world. Nobody knows how many more medicinally useful plants there are in tropical rainforests waiting to be explored. With increasing resources put into bioprospecting, exploring molecular, genetic, and species-level diversity for products of economic importance, nations endowed with rich biodiversity can expect to reap enormous benefits. Broadly utilitarian argument says that biodiversity plays a major role in Dwindling Amazon forest is estimated to produce through photosynthesis 20% of the total oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere. Can we put an economic value on this service by nature? Can you get some idea of finding out how much your neighborhood hospital spends on a cylinder of oxygen? Pollination, without which plants cannot give us fruit or seeds, is another service ecosystem provides through pollinators' layers. Bees, bumblebees, birds and bats. What will be the cost of accomplishing pollination without help from natural pollinators? There are other intangible benefits that we derive from nature. The aesthetic pleasures of walking through the thick woods, watching spring flowers in full bloom, or walking up to a bulbul's song in the morning. Can we put a price tag on such things? The ethical arguments for conserving biodiversity relates to what we owe to millions of plant, animal and microbe species with whom we share this planet. Philosophical or spiritually, we need to realize that every species has an intrinsic value, even if it may not be of current or any economic value to us. We have a moral duty to care for their well-being and pass on our biological legacy in good order to future generations. How do we conserve biodiversity? When we conserve and protect the whole ecosystem, its biodiversity at all levels is protected. We save the entire forest to save the tiger. This approach is called in situ on-site conservation. However, when there are situations where an animal or plant is endangered or threatened and needs urgent measures to save it from extinction, ex situ off-site conservation is the desirable approach. In situ conservation, faced with the conflict between development and conservation, many nations find it unrealistic and economically not feasible to conserve all their biological wealth. Invariably, the number of species waiting to be saved from extinction far exceeds the conservation resources available. On a global basis, this problem has been addressed by eminent conservationists. They identified for maximum protection certain biodiversity hotspot regions with very high level of species richness and high degree of endemism. This is species confined to that region and not found anywhere else. Initially, 25 biodiversity hotspots were identified, but subsequently 9 more have been added to the list, bringing the total number of biodiversity hotspots in the world to be 34. These hotspots are also the regions of exceeded habitat loss. 3 of these hotspots are Western Ghats and Sri Lanka, Indo-Burma and Himalaya cover our country's exceptionally high biodiversity regions. Although all the biodiversity hotspots put together covers less than 2% of the Earth's land area, the number of species they collectively harbor is extremely high, and strict protection of these hotspots could reduce the ongoing mass extinction by almost 30%. In India, ecologically unique and biodiversity-rich regions are legally protected as biosphere reserves, national parks and sanctuaries. India has now 17 biosphere reserves, 96 national parks and 515 wildlife sanctuaries. India has also a history of religious and cultural traditions that emphasize the protection of nature. In many cultures, tracts of forest were set aside and all the trees and wildlife within were venerated and given total protection. Sacred groves are found in Khasi and Jaintia hills in Meghalaya, Aravalli hills of Rajasthan, Western Ghats region of Karnataka and Maharashtra, and Sarguja, Chanda and Bastar areas of Madhya Pradesh. In Meghalaya, the sacred groves are the last refuges for a large number of rare and threatened plants. Ex situ conservation. In this approach, threatened animals and plants are taken out from their natural habitat and placed in special setting where they can be protected and given special care. Zoological parks, botanical gardens and wildlife safari parks serve this purpose. There are many animals that have become extinct in the wild but continue to be maintained in zoological parks. In recent years, ex situ conservation has advanced beyond keeping the threatened species in enclosures. Now, gametes of threatened species can be preserved in viable and fertile condition for long periods using cryopreservation techniques. Eggs can be fertilized in vitro, and plants can be propagated using tissue cultures method. Seeds of different genetic strains of commercially important plants can be kept for long periods in seed banks. Biodiversity knows no political boundaries, and its conservation is therefore a collective responsibility of all nations. Historic Convention on Biological Diversity, the Earth Summit held in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, called upon all nations to take appropriate measures for conservation of biodiversity and sustainable utilization of its benefits. A follow-up, the World Summit on Sustainable Development held in 2002 in Johannesburg, South Africa, 190 countries pledged their commitment to achieve by 2010 a significant reduction in the current rate of biodiversity loss at global, regional and local levels. Thanks for watching the video. Please do like, comment, share and subscribe. Chapter number 15, Biodiversity.